topic. And so when it came to career pivots, I was like, who's done this? Like, done it and made it look really, really easy. Because when it looks easy, I know there's a lot more to dig into. And so I couldn't be more excited to welcome our two panelists today, Erin, Horne, McKinney, and Aslyne Rodriguez. Hello, welcome, ladies. How are you?
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hello.
I will say Stephanie Galloway was scheduled to be on the panel today. Unfortunately, she has a family emergency that she is dealing with. And so I know she's so excited to talk about career pivots. It's been something that she's done recently as well. So I'm hoping that we'll have an opportunity to connect with her in a different space on the network. I want to jump right in. We have a short agenda that I want to move through. Then I want to introduce our two panelists and jump into the meat and potatoes of the conversation. We'll talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll definitely leave some time for Q&A. And so I'd love to hear where people are coming from. This is a networking event. I know it's virtual. We're doing the whole thing, and we got to shout out Zoom for like helping make our lives easier. But if you are interested in like networking and connecting with people, and if we're in real life, I would like try and meet every person that comes to an event because I'm that kind of host. So please in the chat, like add your city and your state where you're calling in from, and add your LinkedIn profile, because I will definitely, at least I know I will connect with you because I'd love to just chat and see what's happening. I love networking, so add that information there. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna roll through a brief presentation, and then we'll jump into the meat and potatoes of the thing. So, oh, Rachel, you may have to give me some privileges to share my screen. We're making this happen. Oh, we are recording. This is live on Facebook right now, which I'm really excited about. So tell your friends on Facebook if they're not listening that they can find us there too. Let me try now. Okay, if you go to my head and then click on the three dots, you can make me the host again.
I gave you sharing privileges, but. You gotta unmute yourself, Erika.
All right, so welcome. I don't know, I'm scared to move this bar and like things happen. Okay, great, nothing happened. All right, so welcome, how to make your career pivot a success. We are definitely going to get to 6 lessons learned. I'm sure we'll get to more because I'm sure there are plenty of lessons out there when it comes to making a transition or making a change. And with, 30 some odd % of the United States out of work right now or underemployed and searching for work, I felt like this was a really relevant time to bring this topic to people, because it is a time when people are thinking about what's next and really thinking hard about what that looks like. So our agenda really quickly, we're going to go through some really quick housekeeping things. I'll give you a brief overview of EPiC Career Network and what it is, and we'll shout out our coaches. Then we'll quickly introduce our panelists and hear a little bit about their career journey and sort of where things started and how they ended up where they were. And then I've got 3 hard questions for them, and we'll start then to dive into any questions that you have. Ask your questions, put those in the chat, because we will definitely want to get to those in real time. So the first thing to keep in mind is that this is a judgment-free zone. So if you are feeling apprehensive about asking a question, don't. And if you are thinking in your mind like, I thought that person should have known that. That seems like it's common sense. Like, don't think those thoughts either. Like, allow people to have the space to ask the questions and to get the feedback that they need, and be kind to yourself. If you felt like, oh, I should have known something and I didn't know that, like, be kind to yourself. This is a judgment-free space. Again, this session is being recorded. Hopefully, if things are going well, we're also live on Facebook as well. So excited to kind of have that out there. And the recorded session, if you registered for the event, you'll receive an email with the recorded session sometime later on today that you'll be able to access. And if you're a member of the EPiC Career Network, then you're going to have access to the recorded session there as well. So a good, hint, hint, nudge, nudge as to why you should join the community. You should also see the presentation deck come through in both of those ways. And then I always say, if you feel comfortable, leave your camera on. If you don't feel comfortable, leave your camera off. Again, this is a judgment-free zone. So whatever you feel the most comfortable with is what we're going with today. And of course, add your questions into the chat, add your comments into the chat. Want this to be as interactive as possible. So what is EPiC Career Network? So we are a community of career coaches and resume experts, job seekers, and career advancement professionals. And we're helping one another find and do our most authentic work. And so whatever that most authentic work means and looks like to you, that's what we want to help you achieve. Membership is currently free to join. So you can join the community. You can get feedback through career coaching office hours, which we have every Tuesday. We have thought-provoking interviews and editorials. And then if you feel like you want additional help, there's also individualized support for you, as well as workshops and resources. And EPiC Career Network was literally founded out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I literally found myself out of work, and I thought, okay, I will, do some consulting work, and I'll do some marketing, and everybody loves marketing, I'm sure I can do that. And then COVID happened, and everybody's like, oh, we're not investing in marketing. We're not doing any of that. Sorry, thanks for playing. And then people started asking me if I would be interested in, reviewing their resumes or taking a look at their LinkedIn profiles. And I thought, okay, well, there must be something here. And so kind of contacted my co-conspirators, which are Rachel Murphy, who is helping us out in admitting people and to join the team as a career coach. And also Katie Grimm, who may or may not be hiding, to also join the team as a career coach. And so these two ladies, they hang out with me on Tuesdays during our career coaching office hours, where you can get real feedback, and we just have a good time. And it's been really fun. And the people that we've talked to so far have been really interesting. Like, Rachel, would you say anything else about that? You just shake your head, yeah.
Great. Yeah, it's been great. It's been fun. People should utilize us more. We're ready to coach.
We're ready to coach. There it is.
Yeah.
So as I said, unfortunately, Stephanie is not here with us today. But if you are interested in connecting with Stephanie, she's such a loving and open person. I'm sure she would love the opportunity to connect with you. She's one of our CODA alumni that was on the panel today. So we're going to look to follow up with her very soon. So definitely don't keep her too far out of your mind. Next on our panel is Erin Horne McKinney. So Erin and I met, maybe 2 or 3 years ago when we were working up in Cleveland, Ohio. And this is not even a very good capturing of some of the pivots that you have made, but definitely you've worked in DC, you've been a tech founder, you've been a VC founder, you have developed a global membership organization for Black female founders. And then this last one currently leads student success for Dream Corps Tech in the Twin Cities, which, if I am still remembering correctly, was founded by the purple one. Is that right? Yes. Okay. So very excited to have you
Prince and
here.
Van Jones.
Say that one more time.
Prince and Van Jones.
Oh, Prince and Van Jones. Okay. All right. Thank you. I know. I'm excited. Next up is Aslyne Rodriguez, who is not just, I mean, again, like another person where I was like, how do I even like capture all this? And like your pivots have been like so quick and like so slick. I was like, wait, what? Did that even just happen? You've gone from nonprofit director to tech startup founder, to microtransit innovator, and like really changed the way people are talking about transit in Central Ohio. You previously were with the Women for Economic Leadership and Development organization here in Central Ohio, and you're currently serving as the Director of Government Affairs for CODA. So this is good. Welcome. How are you?
I am well. I'm excited to be on the call.
Awesome. All right, and then there's me. I'm your moderator, and I'm your host, and I've made a lot of career pivots in my lifetime, the most significant being going from academic life to consultant life and then to corporate life. And so we'll get to some of those lessons learned. But today I'm operating as a creative technologist and helping move this new community forward. And just want to make sure that I shout out our next event next month, which is called Authenticity in Your Career, Leaning into Being a Disruptor. And so as you probably know, if you're a woman or a person of color or difference, you're always already a disruptor. So how do you lean into that status and leverage it for your own benefit and to build your brand and to help others? So that's our next event. So I am done sharing the screen because that is the official presentation portion. And so I want to jump right in. Erin, let's start with you. I'd love to hear you kind of talk us through a little bit of your career path and really tell us a little bit about that first career pivot, because I feel like the first one is sometimes the most challenging. So tell us a little bit about the decision-making process going from here to there, and give us a little idea of where you've been and where you're at now.
Okay, well, I don't know where the first one really was, in the sense that, you know, I really started off in undergrad with the focus of being a broadcast journalist. And my goal was to be Oprah or Kathy Hughes, or just, you know, to own my own radio station or TV station or something at some point at that time. And so, you know, coming out of high school, going into college, the only path that I saw to that was, so it's always been about ownership, right? So entrepreneurship has actually always been there, but it was about, you know, at that time I thought, okay, if I'm the best journalist that I can be, I can own whatever it is, and then that will allow me to make moves. But when I was in college, and I had worked at a number of different news organizations, from Time Magazine to Florida Today, and just different TV stations and BET and so forth. The thing that I learned is that most of the individuals that were in ownership or management, or who ended up in ownership at some level, usually came through the business side. So they knew how to do the advertising, they knew how to run it as a business. And also, I mean, just the, you know, 19-year-old version of myself was looking like, okay, the journalists are pulling up in hoopties and the salespeople are pulling up with really nice cars, right? So I'm like, okay, something's got to change. So so I feel like that's a little bit of the first pivot, was that literally my senior year, I shifted while I was at Howard University to a major that I didn't even know existed in the School of Communications, which was telecommunications management. And I shifted into that and graduated and got into a coveted training program in New York City for national advertising. So I started there. This is right at the height of the .com era. So late 90s, early 2000s. And being kind of the millennial at that time, I often was the one who was put in charge of all the tech companies clients, because people were like, who are these companies? Like, what are they trying to do? They didn't understand them. People were just getting email at the time, not to date myself, but to date myself, right? So there were, because this is 20 years ago. So it was like a very different world. And so to me, I was always at the tech events, but I was always either the only woman or definitely the only person of color, and literally was ignored at these events. Fast forward just a little bit, and I took a role because of a family health issue. I moved back to the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, and took on a national sales role with the news organization here to continue that work. And but as a part of it, because I was kind of this up and coming young leader, I was put on a lot of boards. So I was on the board of the Minneapolis Urban League. I was on the board of a local radio station, and a number of other ones, but really to constantly advise on how to like really get people engaged, or to do diversity marketing and things like that. So I give these ideas, and then they say, okay, we're going to go hire a consultant to do that. And I'm like, wait, why is somebody else, doing the idea that I came up with? So I was probably just around 25, I think, and I was sitting in a meeting with my manager at the news organization that I worked for. And I really, honestly, I hated my job. I hated the people that I worked with. It was getting to the point, and this is usually where my career pivots come, to be honest, and I followed that theme for the rest of my life. When I get to a point that it is painful for me to walk into the door every day, then I'm just like, I don't need to be here. So literally, we were in a weekly one-on-one. She was talking to me, and I just blurted out, like, this is my last day. And I don't even know where that came from. I just was like, I can't take another goddamn minute of this, to be honest. So she was like, she was stunned, and she was like, I can't, are you sure? And I was like, yes. And I just left. And I like to think that was a successful pivot, but it was also a little unsuccessful because I honestly did not plan it, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But I had decided in that moment, like, I can do the same thing for myself. I can be that consultant that they're hiring. And I literally did that. One of the boards that I was on, another one, was for an intern task force for the Twin Cities, because I don't know if everyone knows this, but the Twin Cities has the largest concentration of Fortune 500 companies. So a lot of them get together to talk about constantly retention and recruitment efforts. So I was on this committee, and yet again, it was another idea that I had, and they were getting ready to hire another consultant. And I'm like, whoa, I'm actually starting my own consulting business, and I will take that, thank you. And so my first contract was with General Mills to create a diversity guide to the Twin Cities for interns, diverse interns. And then they used that, they added that and cultivated it into a guide for employees, and it was for several years. But that took me into doing local and national large-scale diversity marketing events for several years to come. And then there's a whole career after that, but you asked about the first pivot. So do you want me to stop there, or do you want me to kind of continue the story?
No, that's good. I want you to stop there because I love the lesson. There's a couple of good ones out of there, right? First is like when you realize that you really hate your job, like that spending another moment there is going to be torture. And you're like, how can I continue to like squander these moments of my life that I will never get back? And I don't mean to make it sound overly dramatic, but sometimes you have to sort of really contextualize it that way. Like, we're not promised tomorrow. We don't have endless amounts of time. And if you're going to spend all your, some very important waking hours, like it should be doing something and being someplace that you enjoy. And then the other one is sort of realizing your value, right? And realizing that like you were making contributions and they were not seeing them. And that there wasn't really going to be much that you were going to be able to do to sort of maneuver around that, except for just leave and find somebody who was going to see the value of your contribution.
And I'll add to that just quickly, that's absolutely right. But one other piece about the value that I'll mention, and what I love about the generations that are coming up today and having social media and doing all these different things is like, there's so many pathways that are shared, right? So that you can say, wow, if they've been able to do that, I can do that. Well, I didn't have that at that time. This was just purely like no idea what this path was. But what I will say, going back to the value point, part of this pivot, you know, especially sitting in that meeting with that manager, it was the second role that I had where I was the top salesperson, right? So this happened in New York, and it also was happening there where I was a top salesperson, but I wasn't being compensated the same. And because I was in both cases the youngest salesperson on those teams, it was almost being justified because of age, right? And quite frankly, really looking back, it was also about race and gender, because there was one in New York, the thing that made me leave New York is that there was a woman that I had recruited from the training class after me who was from Scotland, and she was amazing. But I trained her, I recruited her into the class, we shared an office, and it came out that she was making more than I was. Right. And it was one of those things where, you know, when I started to really push and be an advocate for myself, and I was being told like, no. And of course, today I probably would have sued them. Right. But at that time, I just was like, you know what, I'll do one better. I'm out. And I rolled. But I mean, but I knew my value. And I think that's a really important point that you make, is knowing your value and knowing if you're somewhere and people don't value you, then you can't stay there. You're not going to change their mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Aslyne, so give us a little bit about your career background and a little bit about that first pivot, or what could it be, like a series of pivots before you make the big decision?
Sure. Well, I made a big pivot right before I even entered into the career workforce. I decided to do Teach for America after graduating from college, and my undergrad was in political science. So my goal, though, was to do educational policy. So while it was a pivot from my degree and it had nothing to relate to it, the goal was to do educational policy, and I wanted that experience in the classroom. So I taught in New York for 2 years. I taught kindergarten. I affectionately called myself Dora the Explorer minus the monkey. Like my kids and I had a great time. And then I moved back to Ohio, which is where I'm from, but I moved to Columbus. The ambition behind that was that I definitely wanted to have a presence in the community that I lived in, and New York wasn't going to afford me that opportunity. And I knew that if I moved to Columbus, I could do some things here that felt bigger. I used to say that, like, I didn't want to be a guppy in an ocean. I kind of wanted to be a big fish in a pond. And later on in the pivots of my life, you'll see that has sort of worked out in my favor. But, you know, one of the things that's just part of my story is that my parents are first generation. I'm second generation. I'm Puerto Rican, but my dad's a mechanic. My mom's a school teacher. Like, I didn't move to Columbus because I had connections, because my family had them, and my dad could make a phone call for me, right? Like, everything was building this relationship. And I think that that's one of the things that if I can impress upon anybody, is that because of the relationships I've built, I was able to pivot. Because of the way I'm able to navigate a room, interact with different individuals from different walks of life, it has afforded me the opportunity to make these changes. And I think that that's really critical to that. So after I did Teach for America, I moved back here. I did work for a state senator. And then realized that I had a bigger impact in the classroom. I worked for a charter school, and much like Erin, I had the worst year of my life. Like, I literally was having outer body experiences. I was like watching my soul walk in, like my physical body would walk into work and my soul would just like leave through the window. I used to listen to a song called, the title was I Just Want to Be Okay. That's what I wrote into work on. Then when I walked into work, I played Welcome to the Jungle. That was like what was happening in my life. So
you guys were in education, you were experiencing this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just glad to know I wasn't the only person in an educational environment where Welcome to the Jungle was like my theme song for like when I got on campus.
Yeah. And I just wanted to be okay all the way to work. And so, you know, once I made a commitment, I made a commitment to my students that I would not leave them. I was the third teacher at the beginning of their school year. And so I did, I fulfilled that commitment. And then I think I was just a little lost because, you know, I've always had a plan. I'm very ambitious. And so the goal was to be a teacher, a principal, and a superintendent. There's very few Latinas superintendents, especially in Ohio. There are none. And so it was really, at the time anyway. But when that didn't work out, the journey really took itself. I ended up running an after-school program that was founded by Arnold Schwarzenegger. What I can say is the theme of my life for the first decade of my career was really around access and equity. And that, even though I've made pivots, so I've made pivot from government education to government to nonprofit, right? And now I'm in a public sector, but it's kind of corporate-y with CODA. My North Star was around access and equity. And I did that through transportation. I did that through education. I did that through my political work that I did at the State House. And so even though I've made those pivots, they've had a theme that I feel strongly about, right? And in the startup community too, starting up EmpowerBus, that also was very driven by access and equity. And so I'll sort of stop there, but a lot of my pivoting has had a common thread.
No, I think that's a really good point, because I get the question a lot of, you know, how do I repackage my skills when I don't really have any experience in that space? And a lot of it deals with like identifying what is the common thread, you know, around your career. Like, you may not have realized you were having this common thread when you were going from position to position, but when you take a step back and you look at, you know, what were the things that you cared about? What were the things that you did really well that you were praised the most on? What were the, you know, jobs where you felt like, if I had to go back there, I would, if I could do X, Y, and Z, and sort of figure out what that common thread is. And then that can be the thing that then guides you to the next role, especially, as you said, if you're feeling a little lost and you're like, I'm not really sure like what I'm going to do next. Like, what is it that's really important to you? And use that as your North Star.
And if I can jump in, Erika, to mention,
please.
I think that that's very similar for me. Like, all of the things, all of my skills have all been transferable, right? So so it's just been repackaging, but it's really been about what am I passionate about, and how I identified what I was passionate about for me also came when the recession hit in around 2008 and 2009-ish, right? And I had been working with my marketing firm. I had also was still doing advertising, but when I lost 3 jobs in a row from layoffs and one company going bankrupt and so forth. And I thought, okay, clearly this space isn't working anymore. So I felt at that time I needed to like level up that pivot, right? And I had noticed that while I was living in the Bay Area, at this point I was living in the Bay Area, and a couple of things that struck me were, one, my sister was getting her PhD at Berkeley, she and her husband, and I would meet these other Black grad students, and I was like, this is the best hustle ever. Like, when they would tell me about their research and things like that, and I'm like, somebody's paying you to write about, you know, racism and modeling, you know, like, I just thought it was so interesting. So first, was going in the back of my mind. And then the second thing is that I started to realize that at this point, again, because I'm in the Bay Area, a lot of my clients are still tech clients. And I had started to see a lot of traditional media advertising and sales reps move over into to tech because they were just, at that point, tech companies. Hello? Okay. The tech companies were starting to build up their sales teams. And so at that point, when I started to try to interview with those companies and move over, again, being the top salesperson for the organizations that I was with, I was told no, that I went to an HBCU and those were considered, those were ranked lower than predominantly white schools. I was blown away because like Howard is like the Harvard of HBCUs. So the fact that it would be considered lower than anything was just something I had never heard of in my life. And then the second thing is I was also starting my second tech startup at the time and could not get into Y Combinator or to any of these traditional programs. And looking and saying, okay, you know what, these individuals who are running these programs, tech programs, are white men, and the only people getting into those programs are white men. And so I had what I call my legally blonde moment, right? Where I was like, Obama had just got elected. On the day of his first inauguration, the company I was working for at that time made it mandatory that you could not take the day off, because they did a massive layoff and they tried to hide it under the inauguration. And a lot of the individuals that they laid off, by the way, were women and minorities. And I was one of those individuals. So you can only imagine the level of heatedness I had, that you made me miss a historic event for this BS. That day was like, you know, to use Aslyne's word, like an out of body experience, right? Like so at that point, had my legally blonde moment. I was like, I'm going to DC. I'm going to get into tech policy, which at that time was not even a thing. I had never been in policy or government, but I was like, somebody's got to talk to in DC about why are there not women and minorities in tech from a employment standpoint and also from a entrepreneurship standpoint. And so jumping into going into grad school, like going from 6 figures to, you know, being on social services as a grad student, I have to just tell you, was not an easy jump. Yet again, I think it was still successful because ultimately it led to this whole new career path. And I was in DC in the early days of tech policy evolving into what it is now, versus at the time, I think they were just talking about digital divide issues. But the thing about it is that all of the things you kind of have to be, ultimately, I think the lesson learned here that I want to convey with this story is that you have to be patient with your process and how all of those things together ultimately are leading you to your purpose. And that's the thing that I think, you know, I would have mentors tell me, you know, Erin, if you would just focus, if you would just, you know, pick this one thing and focus on that. But let me tell you something. One, I saw a TED Talk about being a multi-potentialite, and I was so inspired because I was like, that's what I am. I'm a multi-potentialite. I can be good at a lot of things, right? I don't have to just be focused on one. But two, all of those different things ultimately make me a subject matter expert on some things that are transferable skills, right? So I think the other lesson here is like, trust your gut, trust your instincts, trust that voice inside you that is leading you to do something. Because when I chose to go to grad school, when I chose to start my own, you know, marketing communications firm, everyone around me was like, you are nuts. Okay, and didn't see that path, but I saw it. It was really clear. And I've had an amazing career and had opportunities, you know, that going to grad school afforded me an opportunity for a role to be created for me in the mayor's office in DC to create so as an inaugural role to create the tech strategy for the nation's capital, which then informs, to be honest, a lot of what happens in cities around the world. Okay, so I literally, and I knew I had kind of arrived when I got invited to this luncheon with the Prime Minister, no, I'm sorry, the Prime Minister, the Ambassador of Germany. And I thought it was like a luncheon. And so I was trying to invite some other people and they were like, no, this is a private luncheon. And I came and it was literally like 10 people at a table with the ambassador. And it was like the head of Microsoft for like the East Coast. And it was like some really big names in the room. And they were, and the Prime Minister was like, so please advise us on what Germany should do to make sure that we elevate to the same level as it relates to innovation to match the US and the whatever. Me?
Nice.
You're asking me what I think? And I was like, yes,
yeah.
Okay. Somebody saw my value.
Yeah, no, well, and I love that because I mean, number one, like you don't necessarily know what cliff you have to jump off of and go to the edge and like look down. And, you know, one of our interviews that we'll release later on today with Aja Hardy, she says the same thing. She was like, I went from you know, like a 6-figure career, but I knew like doing this fellowship was going to be the best strategy to help me get where I wanted to go and to accelerate the process.
Right.
I think it's easy to sort of look at the time that you put into that and be like, oh, is this really gonna, you know, work out? But being able to kind of accelerate the process and that, and then like trusting the process. And Aslyne, I saw you shaking your head, so I feel like there's something in there you want to touch on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any business owners in my family. But I had a vision. I'm not afraid to take risks. Part of it, honestly, part of the motivation was that I not married, I don't have kids. So I was like, I'm going to take this risk. Now's the time to take it. And in particular, I'm talking about the startup that I started. And I knew nothing about nothing. Even if you would have asked me then, I probably would have told you I knew something about something. But at the beginning, I knew nothing. So I went to anything that started with an S and ended with a P. I went to Wake Up Startups, Rundown Sundown, Startup Week. Like, if it was free, I was there and I was in the front row. Like, I was just like, I'm going to sit in the front row. I'm going to get as much as I can out of this. And even if I didn't find the program or the speaker any value in that, I was like, I'm going to find somebody in this room that I'm going to find value in, right? So I always came into that room. I also, one of my core values is curiosity. And that's really important to me, is like, I'm a constant learner. I'm curious about people, places, things. And so that really drove me to think about it. And the other thing too, and I'm going to speak specifically for Columbus, we don't have Latinas or Latinos who have deep pockets and make things move in this city. And, you know, we have a lot of amazing leaders and civil servants who care about this community. But we know that in communities, a lot of times what moves mountains are people who have financial willpower. To make that happen. And so part of it was that I wanted to start this startup. I also wanted to start a startup that from the inception of it had a North Star, if you will, or was a social enterprise, that it really was going to impact the good. So it was a microtransit company. We were 15 passenger vans by the end of our pivots, taking people to and from work, education, and healthcare, primarily low to moderate income communities. And that wasn't to replace public transportation, but to be a complement and a supplement to that. And so I did that for 4 years, knowing nothing about transportation other than my dad was a bus mechanic. I was like, I know how to check my oil, call AAA if I get a flat tire, but I'm definitely starting this transportation company, right? And so for 4 years, I did that. And I can tell you, and the reason I think I'm shaking my head is this. At the end of the day, I ended up having to close it because of COVID. We lost about $600,000 in clients because you can't put 15 people in a van. And so I had to make a decision. Cash is king. I wanted to, or queen, wanted to make sure that I preserved as much as I could so that I could pay back some of the loans that I had, because I wasn't willing to shoulder more loans. And I honestly did not trust the PPP, because I felt like they kept moving, they kept changing the rules of engagement around that. And I was just like, I am a single woman and I have enough to shoulder, and I'm not trying to shoulder more. So I had to close it down. And part of the reason I'm saying this is that I put a lot of financial risk on the line. I put a lot of personal time on the line. This thing was my baby. And it didn't work out. And I think sometimes that's celebrated in white male communities where, like, oh, you didn't work out, here's another one, right? Like, one, that was heartbreaking. Two, there's financial implications to that still today, because that just happened a couple months ago. But what I will say is that any room I walked into, and Erika can attest to this, like when I talked about EmpowerBus, it's because like it was part of me, my soul, it was everything. And when that closed down, people saw me as a leader in the startup community and in other communities, and I was offered a job. I'm not going to say that that happens to everybody, but because I put so much heart and soul and it still didn't work out, right? This thing that I wanted to work, that I knew I was supposed to start, didn't work out. People saw my character. They saw my value, not all the time, but they saw my value. They saw my ability to navigate and climb the highest mountains. That then when that was over, and then this is again an extreme case, but within like 48 hours of closing my business, I had a job offer. And then another couple job offers started to like come in, right? And that doesn't mean that's always going to happen, but because I believed so hard in this thing, and because I showed up every day, my true self, people saw that and wanted that to be part of their team.
No, I think that's excellent. And I think there's, I mean, so many juicy nuggets in there, right? Sometimes, a career pivot means that you're like doing the thing that you want to do, and you're just doing it, and you're like doing it full force, and you're not waiting for someone to give you that opportunity. And during the process of doing the thing that you're like going full force on, and getting people to believe in your vision, and like getting people to buy in and like trust you and like want to partner with you, like as you said, people see that. Like those are the things you can't train for that. Like you can't, send somebody to coaching to develop those skills. Like those are things that people have developed themselves over time. Those are intrinsic qualities that people have been cultivating for themselves, and they're doing it for their self and not necessarily for anyone else. And I appreciate, even that discussion around successful or unsuccessful. Like a lot of that really depends on how you look at it. Like I literally had a job for 7 business days. And, it's probably my most unsuccessful career pivot, but like in 7 days, we both realized that like, I'm not the person for this space. Like agency land and marketing and communication is a very different animal. And I was older, and I was Black, and I was female, and it was not my space. And, I left a good job to pursue this thing, and it didn't work out. And I spent a lot of time like under the blankets, like for, 24 hours, like, oh my God, like how could I have made such a big mistake? But really I learned like a really important lesson, because I would have been there, like you said, Erin, hating every moment of it. But like determining the success, I think is, your decision as to what success it looks like and what's an unsuccessful move or not. Erin, you look like you have something you want to say.
I always have something to say, Erika. But absolutely, that's the whole point. That's why, I kind of pushed back when you even asked us before, like unsuccessful versus successful, because to me, all of my pivots have been successful. It shaped me into my purpose, and I learned so much from each of those. I mean, going to grad school, and I thought, Aslyne brought up a really good point. Like one thing I didn't mention in any of this, which is amazing because this is just letting me know I'm at a different point in my life. I didn't even mention that I had kids, right? Like, but I used to, everything was about like, and I'm a mom and whatever, but I now have, a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old, 2 boys. But when I started, and I had them, while I had my marketing business, but when that pivot came for me while living in the Bay Area, I was recently divorced, and I was an independent mom trying to make this pivot. And I think, as I also mentioned, like I'm a high risk taker, but people thought I was even crazier to move cross country, with 2 kids. I literally packed up, my Prius with garbage bags, okay, because it was like that kind of situation happening, and drove by myself from California to DC. It was one of the most memorable experiences of my life, and just humbling. And while at the time I thought I was failing, it was really an act of faith. And for me, I guess the point in that is that I don't ever want somebody to think like when something happens where it seems like it's a failure, honestly, that is actually the opportunity, right? And trusting the process that you're being, whether you want it or not, you're being forced to pivot because you might have been getting too comfortable in something. It is time for you to change and shift. And I think one thing that has been one of my more recent realizations is that while I've been doing these pivots in my life, some really just out of survival, quite frankly. And then some really because I can't do something anymore. I have to like birth this thing or whatever. I've realized that sometimes your purpose isn't even just about you. It's also all the people that are watching you and how you're giving them permission to be their authentic selves. And I think that is one of the things, like so many people, I literally got a note a couple of weeks ago from a woman who I went to undergrad with, who was like, I'm writing a book, and is it okay if I use your name in my book to talk about like how you've mentored me and how I've watched like your pivots in life. And even when we talked, Erika, right? Like how you, like what you've done, like inspired me, right? Was not doing it for anybody else. I'm just a sister out here trying to survive and feed my 2 children every day. So I think that I think it's so important to talk about that the visibility of, especially with social media and everything. And I think in all of our testimonies that we've shared is that, you know, especially as women of color and in some cases as mothers or even as single women, you know, I think that you don't realize how many people you are inspiring with your story. And that's why this conversation to me is like, gets me to lean in and gets me so passionate and fired up, which I will say as another point, I think that I wanted to make sure that I covered is every pivot that I've made has been what I realized, and this comes a lot, and you know, Erika, like as a researcher, if you're able to shift your posture around a conversation or a topic, that is the thing you need to be doing, right? Like, and so if you realize that you get excited or your voice is elevated or you get in on something, then maybe there's something there. And I think people are not often as in tune with themselves as they should be to see when that happens. Because for me in the Bay Area, you know, when I lost that job, I called my mom crying. You know, I'm early 30s, divorced, you know, single mom. And I called my mom and I said, I don't know what I'm good at. I don't, you know, some people can sing and some people can, you know, do all these other, like have these gifts and talents. And I don't know what mine is. And see, I'm getting emotional thinking about that same conversation. But my mom said, you know, you remind me of this book. My mom's huge into sci-fi. And she's like, you remind me of this book called The Prince of Wales or about the Prince of Wales or something. And the prince finds out that his gift is helping other people identify their gifts. And I realized she was so right. And that's really been one of the things that through all these different experiences, I've helped other people realize their gifts. And that's where the coaching and the mentoring comes in. And realizing that my work is so much bigger than me. And there are people who will be impacted by my work that I will never know them and they will never know me as well. But it doesn't mean it's any less important, because as Aslyne said, all of my work, no matter what it was about, was also the common thread was access and equity as well.
No, I think that's a really, some really good nuggets to my assistant here. Some really good nuggets to pull out, especially when you kind of talk about like figuring out what it is that you're good at. Like a career pivot, I think becomes much easier when you know what you're really good at and what you really care about, as you both have touched on. It's a lot harder to figure out what you're going to do next when you are not really sure or not really confident about like what you're good at or you know, even like what you're excited about. Wow, this just everything. So she's here with us.
But see, that's the point of it, right? I think that's a great example. Like when I used to bring my kids to meetings, you know, when they were infants and board meetings, and people thought I was crazy. And what I love now is that that as women, that we have the permission to be mothers now and not negate that part of our lives, because that's also what shapes us, right? I don't care what anybody says. It's like one of the things, there's so many skills that have taught me to work with people better from being a mother, right? And because it's all the same herding cats kind of mentality.
It is, absolutely. Okay, so I want to, because we are at 1:52, so I want to be mindful of time. I don't know if there are any questions that have come through the chat or not.
Do you like your background?
I do. Thank you so much. You're being so helpful.
No, I'm not.
And here we go. So I want to ask you guys both to respond to the question, because I get this a lot when people are feeling like nervous or apprehensive about an interview. And the interviewer says, you know, what do you see for yourself 3 to 5 years down the line? And you're like, you know, making this career pivot, or you're in the midst of that. How do you respond to that question? Who wants to tackle it first, Aslyne?
Sometimes I make that shit up. Like sometimes I'm just like, you know, if I'm in the pivot, I'm like, I am pivoting right now. So I'm trying this thing out, right? But I'll say is like, let me go to the education pivot. Like I had this plan. Like I saw myself being an educator, a school leader, and then a superintendent, right? That was that. When I got into the after school space, when I thought after education, I was like, oh, I'll be an executive director of a nonprofit. Well, that happened at 26. And I felt like that was something that was going to happen later on in my life. So then I was like, well, and I did it for 4 years, and we were $75,000 in debt when I took over. When I left, we were a $1.4 million nonprofit, and we had gone statewide. And I one of my girlfriends is on the line here, and she knows I suffered. Toward the end, I was at the edge, right? Just like I affectionately said that I was a Tootsie Roll. Like I had gained so much weight. Like I was like short, brown, and wrapped too tight. Like I was like this, I love myself too much to suffer. So then that's when I decided to do this, to try my hand at entrepreneurship. And if somebody had asked me that at that time, I think what I would have said was, you know, I'm in this space of entrepreneurship. I have ideas and I want to see where they go. I'd love for them to be successful and for me to be financially independent. That was the best I think I could come up with, right, at the time. Now I'm in transportation. Do I see myself in this career for the rest of my adult career life? No, I do not. So if somebody asked me that right now, because I mean, I am in it, I'm only 2 months into this position. Part of me is that I want to do a really great job and fulfill the mission that I started at EmpowerBus, which is and was to help people, right, really connect the dots, get people to their destination in an efficient and dignified manner. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that I'll jump back into a startup that I'll probably be the founder of, or that I will be an entrepreneur at a corporation where I'm there doing innovation work. So I think on the line too for folks, like, there will be times where you question what you're doing. There were so many times when I was doing EmpowerBus, I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? This is so hard, right? So I think that that's just part of the career journey. We are not our parents' generation where they just sucked it up and retired, you know, at 35 years. My dad retired as a bus mechanic after 32 years. My mom retired from Youngstown City Schools after 35 years. I admire that. I admire that they chose a career, stuck in it, even if they weren't happy. That is not our generation, right? Our generation is moving, even if you decide to stay in a certain, let's say you're an accountant, you might be an accountant for your entire career, but you're not at the same accounting firm, right? You might go to a boutique accounting firm. You might go to that. So I just say, like, it is natural to question what you're doing. It's natural to be curious about something else. I think the difference between probably Erin and myself is that we're willing to go and do it. A lot of people think about doing things, but they feel too either comfortable or too afraid to take the leap. And that's okay too. I'm not saying that that's not okay. I don't know people's circumstances and why they choose to do what they do, but part of it is just the pursuit of, there's an organization called Leadership, and they have this amazing vision. And what part of it, and I always love this, is they say their tagline is having a healthy disregard for the impossible.
I like that. That's good. You know, and I think it's important to note that it's not going to be easy, and you're going to question yourself. And that's when, you know, having some confidence and knowing what you're good at and knowing what you really are excited about are the things that are going to help guide you to where you want to be. Because at the end of the day, you're right. You know, people are treating their careers more like a mercenary, like mission. Like, I'm going in, I'm gonna learn what I can learn over the next like 2 years or so. If it's 3 years, like, you're lucky. And then I'm moving on. I hope that I leave the organization like I have an impact, and I hope that you can help me move on to my next spot. And, you know, we, Katie and I can attest to really trying to coach entrepreneurs and business owners and hiring managers to take that perspective. Because when you start asking candidates, like, so where do you think you're going to be in 5 years? Like, a lot of candidates like, I don't know. And I'm not really planning it out. Like, I'll see when I get there. What about you, Erin? Do you have a couple comments?
I do. You know, I just believe in being authentic. Like, that's just such a big part of who I am. And so I never try to oversell or undersell something. I'm, you know, even when I'm in a process and they ask me those kind of questions, and I'm not going to lie, and just know this, most questions, I mean, a lot of questions that you're asked in interviews and in the process, I think they're ridiculous. I think they're like, the process needs to innovate itself. Okay. Because it's like the worst questions and the worst scenarios that you're presented with sometimes. But what I will say, so I just always bring it back to me and like what I can control. And so in answering that, I'm very much like, look, this is what I bring to the table. Now, where that might go, if there's an opportunity to grow with the organization, wonderful. But at the end of the day, you know, this is the work that's important to me, purpose-driven work. I'm always clear, like, I'm here to do purpose-driven work, and that's who I am and what I'm here to do. And at the point that that purpose is served, then it's time for me to move on. You know, I also, you know, describe myself as an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur. So everyone knows, so I try to find roles that allow me the space to do that. I would 100% be doing entrepreneurship full-time if I wasn't a mom and I didn't need healthcare for me and my kids, and if I didn't need, you know, like plans for college. I mean, that's real talk, right? So not everyone, I think the point is very clear that not everyone is in that space to make those jumps and those leaps. And that's why when I tell people, when they, you know, before they're, you know, involved in, you know, partnership or have kids or whatever, like, that's the best time to do some of the funnest stuff. But it doesn't mean it has to stop when you become a parent. It just means that you need to be more thoughtful. I mean, my kids in some ways probably feel like I've dragged them through a lot of different things, but also my children are amazingly resilient, have had phenomenal experiences that they wouldn't otherwise have. And I hope that shapes them to who they're going to be, into, you know, amazing, positive, contributing individuals to the world. And my goals and why I'm doing something. And I try to also be open to letting the universe kind of bring things and opportunities to me, similar to what Aslyne mentioned about, you know, when people, the best roles that I've had have been the ones that people have called me and said, hey, this role came up, I thought of you, or I put your name in the hat, or, and that's been honestly the last 4 roles that I've had. Somebody called me, not the ones that I, you know, applied for and I thought, you know, that sounds interesting, but it's the ones that somebody said, hey, they're creating this whole new role, they need somebody like this, you came to mind. And it's what people say, you know, when you're not in the room and what have you. So I usually, at this point in my career, I don't have to really try to to be or pretend that I'm something that I'm not. And also, let's just be honest, going back to the difference in generations, people don't stay with, I literally just had this conversation because I'm in a leadership role process for something else.
Hold on. I'm just going to stop you really quick because I just want to make note that it is 2:02. So if you are someone that needs to drop off the line and you don't want to be rude, please feel free to drop off the line. It sounds like we're going to continue the conversation for a couple more minutes, but I just want to let people know if you need to drop off, drop off. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Erika, and for noting the time. I just wanted to quickly say that we're not in our parents' generation where people do stay at the same organization or and retire from that. And the lesson in a lot of the places that I've learned is that organizations are not loyal to you either, right? So while people are like, I can't leave this job, I've got to be loyal. I've been with this company and they did this for me. The second that something's not hitting right on their bottom line, trust me, you're an afterthought, and they will find somebody else and they will do whatever that is. And I think going through that experience early on in my career of layoffs made me realize that you could be the most amazing salesperson. You could be the most valuable in a bunch of different ways. But at the end of the day, like, you're disposable, right? So that's what made me say, how do I make myself not disposable? How do I constantly pivot? And the pivot isn't always because of being forced to from, the economic reasons of the environment, but also like just, making sure that our industries, no matter what industry you're touching or whatever, they're evolving and you have to continue to stay relevant. And so a lot of the work that I've done is to make sure that I stay relevant, because so what I was gonna say is one of the asinine questions that I always hear in a process is, well, I've seen that you've jumped around a bit in your career and you haven't stayed at the same place for more than X, Y, and Z. And so let's talk about, why you've made these, made a lot of transitions in your career. And I'm like, a lot of like, what does that even mean? Like, what place do people stay at companies for 30 plus years anymore? Tell me, I would like to be hired by them. Okay. So that means they're amazing. But I just want to say that, like, don't get caught up in the antiquated system of the HR process that is still using the same questions that were used, 50 years ago. Okay, so I just think you sometimes have to be the one that brings the realness to the conversation.
No, I think that's a really good point. And especially the point about, companies aren't going to be loyal to you, right? Like, I think we get caught up in this idea, like, I've been doing such a great job and they really appreciate me and, they really love me. And that's not really the case. And so they may love you. Your boss may think you're amazing. But as you said, like, if stuff does not hit the way it's supposed to, you're an afterthought. And so I appreciate that as, like, your final thought to leave with people. Aslyne, what's the final thought that you want to leave with folks before we wrap up?
I'll just repeat what I said. Like, I think I encourage people to have a healthy disregard for the impossible, especially when you're thinking of that it's impossible to change your career or to pivot. And that, like, tactically, LinkedIn is a great resource to reach out to somebody and just say, like, hey, this is a career I'm interested in. Would you be willing to chat with me? If they don't respond to you, you lost 30 seconds of typing up a message to them. And I think you'd be very surprised how many people if you're not asking for anything other than advice, people love giving advice. That's it.
And they love to talk about themselves. That's right. How I'm building out these great panels. I'm like, hey, listen, people will talk about themselves, honestly. Okay. Give them 30 minutes. So this has been amazing. I so appreciate your time, Erin and Aslyne, for joining us for this conversation and sharing a lot of juicy nuggets, more than I could definitely count. I'm looking forward to getting this out on the EPiC Career Network and making others have access to this, because there's so much good stuff here. Thank you so much, ladies. We will see everyone next month. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.